Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Steve Wagner. He's a Global Managing Director of Decision Analytics at Experian. We're going to take a look at the annual Global Identity and Fraud Report. Steve, it's great to have you with us at Market Site. Welcome.
Good to be here.
You know, when you look at the fraud report, the overall theme that I got out of it was you're looking to challenge businesses to think differently with customer engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing to note about the report is that this report focuses not so much on modalities of attack or attack vectors, which is what you'll typically see. This is all about how to help businesses think about fraud in a different way that helps their business.
Some of the challenges are, and this happens quite frequently across many verticals, is that security measures get siloed. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you often find, it goes back to this idea of many different attack vectors. There are many providers in this space, literally thousands, and they have a tendency to be very siloed in their approach. They solve this type of fraud, they solve that type of fraud. And so what you end up getting is a siloed consumer on the business side and a siloed provider on the provider side. And what ends up being the right way to answer this is to be able to bridge that.
All right, now let's talk about expectations for customer engagement. As the value of data grows, so does the risk of fraud.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think the biggest concern is when you try to make sure most consumers, as they interact with a business, are primarily concerned about security. That's their first interest. And one of the things we learned actually in last year's report was that consumers are often willing to provide additional information if it will ease the path, if it will make the experience better. Certainly fraud is going up, and in this year's report what we've seen is the highest level we've yet measured in terms of businesses saying that fraud is increasing in their business this year over last.
All right, I'm going to take a look at our first chart here. Now this is about recognizing the customer and having that sense that you're recognizing the right customer.
Yeah, so this chart is it gets exactly at the point that I was starting to raise before. This says 95% of businesses say that they're pretty good at being able to recognize who the customer is. Interestingly though, 55% of consumers is the full amount that think that they're actually being recognized. That schism is the primary message of this report, right? It shouldn't be that way. Consumers should have about the same feel as businesses.
All right, in our next chart here, the cycle of trust. I thought this was one of the more interesting charts that we have.
Yeah, so in the cycle of trust, what you're really saying is the way you build trust with a consumer is through your interaction with them. Again, as we started to say, consumers are primarily interested in trust in the interaction. What happens with, and we'll talk about this I think in the next chart, but what happens with businesses is they tend to think about personalization. So businesses are thinking, how do I send the right message to the consumer? The consumer's thinking, I want to trust this interaction, so give me the indicia of security. Let me feel like you really know me. And that cycle of trust goes through your entire interaction. It's not just coming in as a prospect, it's actually every single time you touch the business has an opportunity to build that layer of trust.
And that's exactly what the next chart is, where you're looking at extracting the value of that data while giving the customer a sense of control.
Exactly right. And so when you do that right, there's a number of things that you have to do, but making sure that you approach the customer, communicate with the customer well, that asking the customer for additional information is not bad, but asking them for additional information, therefore getting that cycle of trust enhanced, and then using the appropriate tools on the back end, analytics, breaking down the silos, ensuring that you can really provide all the solutions that you need. So from a business, it's seamless, and a customer has the experience of feeling like they're in a trusted interaction.
So Steve, it sounds like we really are at an inflection point when it comes to data and customer protection.
Yeah, we are. Today, there are so many techniques, biometrics, advanced analytics, AI that you can apply, and with tools such as Experian has, right, you can actually apply many of those different forms through a single interface. So we have a product called CrossCore. That's the way we provide that, but let's say that you're in a transaction and what you want to do is document confirmation. We work with a partner that does document reading, document confirmation, screen in a driver's license, do everything that you need. All of that can come through a single device. So that's where the market's moved, the ability to run across a variety of different solutions. Behavioral biometrics is a great example.
Do you think companies are getting better when it comes to cybersecurity and customer protection? Of course, we only hear about the bad cases in the news, right? But do you think overall cybersecurity is becoming a priority for companies and they are being more proactive and getting better with it?
Yeah, there's no question that companies are getting better. And they've been challenged in the marketplace by looking at notable examples of where it didn't work very well. But the real issue is that we see now is not so much just hardening your security, right? Because that's been part of the quick reaction. Harden my security, make it more difficult for people to get in. But what we're really saying is that you have to focus on how you interact with the consumer. That's not about hardening your security. It's about really looking at the interaction. Most businesses don't quite understand how much information is really available in the digital interface. There's a lot. And when you start accessing all of the bits of information, device ID, if you have an SDK in a phone and you're doing it digitally, there's a ton of ways to make sure that you're bringing the value of that information to the transaction and to the consumer.
All right, Steve, thanks so much for joining us at MarketSite. And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Joe Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.